Good afternoon. Oh, okay, folks. You're gonna see me here all week. All right, so let's get this right the first time. Good afternoon. Thank you so much. And thank you on behalf of the Air Force Association. Welcome to our 2017 Airspace and Cyber Conference. The Air Force has come a long way over the past 70 years, and in fact, our Air Force represents the youngest and most diverse military service whose culture is defined by strength, character, and constant evolution. As I am confident anyone who has ever served in a position of Air Force command or leadership will agree, nothing, and I mean nothing, matters if our airmen and their families aren't supported and cared for in a way that recognizes them as the most important element in our Air Force. We're excited to bring to you this Air Force Senior Leader Town Hall meeting focusing on some of the important issues faced by our airmen and their families. AFA is proud to present this excellent opportunity for interaction with the senior leadership of our Air Force and their amazing spouses. On stage, we have Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, Kaleth Wright, and his wife, Tanya. Chief of Staff of our great Air Force, General David Goldfein, and his wife, Dawn. And how about that speech this morning from our secretary? What about that? Our Secretary of the Air Force, Heather Wilson, and her husband, Jay Holm. These senior leaders are here to participate in a dialogue with you about issues important to you and your families. I will now ask Lieutenant General Gina Grosso, Deputy Chief of Staff for Manpower, Personnel, and Services, to join me on stage to begin the question and answer portion and direct questions to the appropriate speakers as time permits. Please write your questions on the question cards provided by our volunteers. General Grosso, over to you.
Yeah, apparently they think I'm a little height challenged. Well, it's my honor to moderate this wonderful panel today. And just to get us started as we're waiting for your questions to come in, Madam Secretary, if I could start with you. As you know, airmen are very excited about your efforts to provide them, give them back some time. What initiatives can they look forward to in the next years on this effort?
The question was, what are we going to do to give airmen back some time? There's a couple of things. One is that, and this is something the Chief started, was taking a look at all of the training that we require airmen to do, particularly that dull as dirt, computer-based training that hasn't changed for the last 10 years, and you got it the first time. We know that we need to do some periodic training and things, but ladder safety training every year probably doesn't add all that much to the force. So we're looking at training across the board to make sure that it's relevant to the fight. If it improves our readiness, it improves our ability to do the job, we should do it. But everybody adds on additional stuff and nobody takes away stuff. So we're trying to look at taking away stuff with respect to time. I think the other thing we're really focused on is this review of Air Force policies and instructions. I was at Whiteman Air Force Base, and this is a classic. The maintainers there have to check every one of their torque wrenches every day before they go out to the aircraft. There was probably a reason for that when somebody told them to do that, and it's in one of their tech orders or instructions. They don't know why they have to do that. They just know they do. So every maintainer spends 45 minutes a day checking every wrench before they go out to the aircraft. And they don't know why. They just do it that way. We need to look at those kind of things. If somebody broke a wrench once and had to go back to the hangar to get a wrench, chances are that would take less time than 45 minutes a day to check every wrench before you go out to the airplane. So we're going to do some of those kind of things.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Chief, over to you, if you wouldn't mind. We know that your focus, your Big Rock #1, as we call it, is your focus on squadrons. Could you please give the audience an update on how you think you're doing with your Big Rock #1?
Well, the Secretary and I are swinging away at it. And, well, we didn't get to this position overnight, and we're not going to reverse it overnight. The way the Secretary and I are approaching this is about 100 swings of the axe at the trunk of this tree that we go afterward. But the reality is that it's at the squadron level, and the Secretary said it this morning, it's at the squadron where airmen families actually thrive. And so part of what we're doing is trying to push decision authority down to squadron command and enable them to be able to make those key decisions that they believe they need to make to run their squadrons, and to be able to do those things that bring back some airmen's time. Very often, the real meaningful work is going to happen not at the chief and secretary level, but actually wing command level and below, to make sure that the squadron is the place where innovation occurs, where readiness is generated, where, as I said, airmen and families thrive. And so as we travel around, the Secretary and I we're getting some feedback on what's working well and what areas we still need to focus on. But the message is getting out. I think that the idea that we trust commanders to make those decisions and to move out without waiting for us is resonating. And finally, I would say that we're working hard to ensure that the organizational chart of the United States Air Force has the Secretary and I at the bottom, squadron commanders at the top, and everyone in between supporting them to get the mission done, because that's where we succeed or fail as an Air Force. So we're a long way from declaring victory. I believe this is more of a journey than a destination, but you can depend on the Secretary and I to just keep swinging at it with passion.
Chief Wright, as you know, we just made some significant changes to our enlisted professional military education. Can you share some of your insights from the field on how that's being received?
So I would say the changes that we recently made in our enlisted professional military education were overwhelmingly positive. So this change came about really by us, myself and the other chiefs that sit on our council, by really listening to the field. So the airmen told us what they thought was wrong with the system. We noticed a few adverse effects and second and third order effects that we had not considered when we changed the system. And so we put a team together. A lot of great folks worked on this, to include folks up in the Pentagon, some folks down at AETC, Air University, the Barnes Center. And I think we made what was a good change. This will allow many of our airmen to attend PME in residence, and a few other things that I believe it fixed. So from my perspective, the change has been really positive. I look forward to continuing to improve our PME system. So.
Mrs. Wright, if I could keep the mic down at that end of the table. I know one of your passions is spouse development. Could you share some of your thoughts on spouse development, please?
So yeah, there are many resources out there for spouse development. There's a program called the Military Spouse Employment Partnership, and they provide many resources on career interests, education, assessment tools, and any sort of job information on today's job market. And so they've got a 24/7 global platform that you can get online at any time and use that resource. Also, there's a program called My Career Advancement Account, and that provides the opportunity to apply for up to $4,000 in tuition assistance for eligible spouses. So those spouses in pay grades E1 through E5 and O1 and O2, there's the opportunity for them to apply for that tuition assistance. Also, MSEP, they provide scholarship resources and a scholarship research tool. So there are plenty opportunities out there, and later on today there's going to be another panel And Mr. Eddie Mincer, he's part of the MSEP partnership program. He'll be there today, so if you'd like to join us at 1:55, there'll be a panel on military, or Air Force, Air Force family support.
Thank you, ma'am. Mrs. Goldfein, as we know, you have moved you and your children many times on your way to being the First Lady of the Air Force. Can you give some advice and some of your personal experiences on how you ensured your children's education had a continuum?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. It's actually one we hear frequently when my husband and I are on the road traveling. And I totally understand this concern. Dave and I have 2 daughters, and they were in 9 different school districts while growing up. The longest they lived anywhere was when they were in college. So I appreciate this question. I would recommend that any of you spouses out there, the first thing to do would be to contact your Airmen and Family Readiness Center and ask to be connected with the school liaison officer or the SLO. They are there to help assist you with any of the school requirements at the new location. And as you might know, we also have the Military Interstate Children's Compact, which ensures children transferring between states has fair and equitable treatment. And we also have a subject matter expert on that, and that's Mr. Carl Buchanan. Is he here? He should be sitting in one of the first 2 rows. There he is. He's the expert in this area, and if you have any additional questions with regards to the Military Interstate Children's Compact, he will be at the panel following this one in Potomac A and B, as Tanya was saying. The other thing you can do is while you're talking with the Airmen Family Readiness Center, ask about another organization that helps to ensure our children have quality education, and that's a nonprofit organization called Military Child Education Coalition, or MSEC. And you can also find there a lot of information about what they do and their programs and initiatives on their website, militarychild.org. So I think those are the 3 best places to go. The first place to go is the Airmen Family Readiness Center. They have all the questions.
Chief, we have our first question from the audience, and this airman is asking, what barriers are preventing full implementation of the enlisted RPA program? Enlisted UAV pilots would solve the pilot shortage and save the Air Force millions of dollars.
So, Gina, let me make sure I got the question right. The question is, what barriers are there to keep us from fully implementing? Yeah, so the question is, what barriers are preventing full implementation? There actually are no barriers. Here's the path that we're on. This is a broader question than can enlisted fly RPAs, because we already know the answer to that is an overwhelming yes. Our enlisted force can do anything that we ask it to do. The question is where we're going in the business of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance as a growth industry against a rather insatiable appetite by combatant commanders and joint commanders to want to know what's around the corner, what's over the hill, what's in the town, what's there, and who can blame them. And so as we look at the industry going forward, the question we're asking is, what's a sustainable officer-NCO mix in this enterprise, especially as we procure new technology and look at new ways of doing business in the future? And the good news is we've actually been down this path historically in our Air Force. There was a time when you had to be an officer and a scientist to actually fly a constellation in space. And we asked the question, what about a philosophy major? Can a philosophy major actually fly a constellation in space? And there was huge resistance. It said, absolutely no way. This is the highest technology we have, the highest level of security. There's no way. You've got to be an officer and a scientist. And so we did a pilot program, and we moved in, and we worked our way through it. And then we woke up one day and we had history majors and philosophy majors and we were doing just fine. And then we asked the question, what about an airman? Can an airman actually fly a constellation in space? Again, huge resistance. No way, you've got to be an officer. There's no way this is the highest level classification. So we did a pilot program, and we worked our way through it. And if you go to Schriever Air Force Base today, guess what you're going to find? What, 50, 60% of the constellations at the highest level of classification, national level security, are flown by airmen. The GPS signal for billions of people on the planet is flown and provided by 6 or 7 young airmen who are right now at Schriever managing that constellation. So we actually have a way of doing this, and we'll work our way through this time too. And the real question we're after is, what is that optimum sustainable officer enlisted mix in the business of remotely piloted aircraft? And I think the path that we're on is going to really inform us, and we're going to mature our thinking as we go. And last thing I'll say is, I had a chance this past week to meet some of our first enlisted pilots who came out for an event on the Hill. And I'll tell you what, they are absolutely crushing it, and I couldn't be prouder of them.
Madam Secretary, over to you, please. How do we communicate budgetary issues to the American people when the defense budget already seems quite large to them? How can we get their buy-in?
The question was how to communicate the defense budget and the needs of defense to the nation. It's harder now because fewer Americans serve. During World War II, 1 in 10 Americans served in uniform. 1 in 10. So every third house on the block had a blue star in the window. Somebody in your family or your neighborhood was serving in uniform and they could tell the story. Today, it's 2 in 1,000. 2 in 1,000. So you kind of have to go another 167 houses away before you find a blue star in the window. That's a challenge. I think the easiest way to talk about it usually is through stories. And your story as an airman, or your family's story as to how many times your husband or wife has been deployed. What your life is like when they come home, when they're not really home. You know, they're home, but they then have to go to support Red Flag, or they have Squadron Officer School, and what that really means for your family, and why you can do this for your country for 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years, but you're not sure you can keep doing it at the size we're at. I think there's also the reality that this country doesn't ask much in terms of sacrifice from most of us as citizens, because we have you. And you need to let that sink in with your neighbors sometimes. So tell your story. That's the most powerful thing.
This is really a fantastic question. I just want to offer one additional thought to Madam Secretary's point. Show of hands, how many of you are Air National Guardsmen? Okay. One of the ways that we talk to the American people is through you. I had a formative experience as a young wing commander at Holloman Air Force Base when I went up to meet the governor, then Governor Richardson, in his office up in the Capitol. And going into the meeting with me was the commander of the Taco Guard, Jay Bledsoe. And so I was a new 1-star. I mean, I was somebody, you know. I'm one of the highest ranking, you know, officers in the entire United States of New Mexico, meeting the governor, you know. So I walk in there and I shake his hand. Governor, it's great to meet you. I'm Brigadier General Dave Goldfein, You're a wing commander at Holloman. Hey, good to meet you, Dave. And then he looks at Jay Bledsoe, the commander of the Taco Guard, and he goes, hey, I hope our wives aren't doing much damage out there shopping today. Huh, that's interesting. And then we're having a nice little discussion. Then he looks over at Jay Bledsoe and says, and oh, by the way, what time's your daughter coming over to babysit? So here's the question. In that office, who's the full-timer and who's the part-timer? Let me give you a hint. I was the part-timer. There was no way I was going to have a relationship with the governor of New Mexico, like the commander of the Guard that lives there, has family there, has gotten to know, have grown up together, whose spouses are shopping and whose daughter is babysitting. That's a relationship that's built over time, and it's full-time. And so our Air National Guard is in every state in the Union. And if we actually pull together, you know, and tell our story like the Secretary says, we'll be unstoppable.
Mr. Hone, what has been your biggest challenge and then success as an airman's spouse? Yes.
Well, it didn't really work that way for me. Heather had already left active duty before we got engaged. And I was continuing on in the reserves and the Guard. So we haven't dealt with those changes and challenges so much. She had to suffer my absences on extended Guard duty and certain deployments, but she wasn't on active duty when we were married or at any time. But I know there are a lot of challenges in the transitions and such. And I joined Air Force ROTC before the Air Force turned 25. So I have seen some changes over the years in our priorities and such. And one of the things I recently learned is that now there's a coordinated effort from the Department of Defense, the State Liaison Office, for the spouses who are professionals, whether it's an EMT, a teacher, lawyer, nurse, anything that requires certification or licensure, for that to be transferable or portable in a sense for military spouses specifically. And over half the states have taken specific action on that. I can tell you as a military and civilian retiree, having moved from New Mexico to South Dakota, that Heather chose one of the few states that had no bar reciprocity for lawyers, so that I could not practice law in South Dakota without taking the bar exam. Now, our daughter thought that was a great idea. Maybe I could be the oldest person to ever take the South Dakota bar, but it didn't appeal to me, so. But the Department of Defense State Liaison Office, I think if you have issues with transferring and professional certification and such, that's the place to contact.
Thank you, sir. Mrs. Wright, an audience member would like to know, how do I find out the name of my key spouse, especially as I get to a new base?
This is actually a question I get a lot. How do I find out who my key spouse is? And I hear a lot of spouses tell me that I was never contacted. I don't know who my key spouse is. So I would say if you have that question, the first thing you can do is reach out to the unit commander, to the first sergeant. If you don't know who that is, you can always reach out to the Airmen and Family Readiness Center. Or if you're at a joint base, you can reach out to the Military Family Readiness Center to get the name of your key spouse.
Chief, is the new 100% selection rate for Captain to Major a long-term fix to a personnel shortage?
I can only tell you that it's going to be in place for the next 3 to 4 years. And I say that because, as you and I talked about, you know, the force has been through, quite frankly, a a lot of fairly significant throttle changes in terms of managing the force over the last several years. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is bring a little bit of stability to the force, a little bit of predictability to the force going forward. And the reality is, when we look at the basic numbers, we need all of those qualified captains to pin on majors and become field grade officers. We need them all. And so the question we asked was, all right, is this yet one more opportunity for us to actually return some time back to airmen? Because if it's 100% promotion rate, PRFs are not required, and we all know that there's a pretty significant administrative burden associated. And we all do it, and it's an important part of leadership to do it well, but this is going to remove a very significant administrative challenge for the next several years in terms of promotion boards. And the reality is that we are blessed. We are blessed with incredible talent. The secretary, chief, and I see that, when we go out, every single day. I mean, the depth, the innovative spirit, the quality, the professionalism, the discipline, the commitment of this force is absolutely unmatched. And so I'm really proud of the fact that actually we can remove a bit of an administrative burden, very often laid on squadron commanders who are working pretty hard as it is, and that we can provide some predictability and stability for the force. So I can tell you that for at least the next 3 to 4 years, and you can correct me to 100% as the director of personnel if I got this wrong, but for the next 3 to 4 years, we're just setting policy right here at the table. It's going to be 100%.
Copy, Chief.
Could I just add one thing to that? It's 100% of those who are qualified. So right now we're at 95%, and it does put the burden and the responsibility back on the squadron commanders to say, all right, if you've got a captain who really shouldn't become a major, you need to step forward and be a leader and say so. And not leave it to some faceless promotion board to weed out the 5% or weed out the 3% who maybe shouldn't be majors. So with that pushing back to the squadron and the wing, greater authority, comes the responsibility to take that leadership responsibility and say, all right, I'm not going to have to do paperwork on everybody, but we've got one who's really not ready, and you're willing to step up and make that decision. And that's a tough decision when you know somebody, but that comes with greater responsibility at the squadron level.
Madam Secretary, given your experience in academia, is there a role for academia in conducting research to support military families and airmen resiliency?
It's actually a very interesting question. So is there a role for university-based research in studying resiliency of airmen? There probably is, and my guess is there's probably some of that already going on, either through Randolph and the Personnel Center or also in the health. It's really fascinating to me how much research the Air Force does on health and wellness. I think we probably have the most studied physical fitness test of anybody anywhere. So there probably is an opportunity to do that, to see what we can learn about resilience. I would also add that one of the heartbreaking things about being Secretary of the Air Force, about coming back to the service, is that I don't believe in my 4 months here that there has been a week that has gone by without a suicide in the active guard or reserve. And we've tried all kinds of programs, and it just hasn't seemed to budge the numbers. And if, as a service, we can find out a way to improve the resiliency and the support of our airmen who are suffering, often silently, and get them the help to be able to find a path towards hope and joy, that would be not only a great benefit to this service, but to the nation and every family that's had to live on beyond a suicide and wonder what they didn't say, what they didn't ask, wonder if they could have changed the course of someone's life. And if there's something we could do on resiliency, if it changes that number, that would be a great thing.
You know, we're actually leveraging RAND and our own Air University. I know General Johnson, General Edgar, a bunch of us get together on a regular basis and talk about resiliency and really try to find ways to discover what are the things that we can do to help our airmen become more resilient to fight things like suicide and some of the other stressors that show us that our airmen aren't as resilient as they can be. So, I really look forward to, and I'll talk a little bit about this on Wednesday morning, I really look forward to continuing to try to help our airmen so that we don't ever, sometimes people say zero is, you can't get to it. I really wish we could get to zero when it comes to suicides, but we'll continue to leverage the resources that we have available. A lot of work going into the latest thought research from some of our civilian counterparts as well, so I'm really looking forward to continuing that.
And Chief Wright, I'm sorry, General Goldfein.
Just one quick story to share on this. So I was a brand new wing commander again, and I was invited to go to basic military training, BMT, for a graduation. And I went down to graduation there at Lackland. And as I was sitting there in the stands, I thought, how did I get to the point where I always got all the way to wing command, and yet I had never gone to the place to see where we actually produce airmen? And so, because I'd spent most of my time operational, it just didn't fit into the schedule. And I went back to my wing and I got all my squadron commanders together and I said, field trip. We're all going to Lackland. And so I took all my squadron commanders and we all did a field trip together to Lackland. Mandatory fun. And I gave them a test question and I said, okay, here's your test question up front, and on our way home we're going to talk about it. Only one question. When you're in that stands, here's what you're going to see. You're going to walk out on that parade ground, and you're going to see the most hopeful airmen on the planet. And they're going to be hugging and crying, and the families are going to be out there, and you're going to see these airmen who are full of hope, full of a great career, full of starting a family, full of having their first dessert, full of hope. Here's the test question. How do so many of them transition from hopeful to hopeless under our watch? It's an important question for all of us who are privileged to be supervisors, leaders, first sergeants, first line supervisors, all of us in the room. How do airmen transition from hopeful to hopeless? And for all the wing commanders that are here, and thanks for coming, I would just plant this seed with you. It's a great field trip for you to take with your subordinate commanders.
This will be the last question before closing comments, and it's going to Chief Wright. Chief Wright, do you feel the EPR system is working the way it was intended?
So I do believe our EPR system is working the way it's intended. We've received some pretty good feedback. So there are some slight changes that we need to make with respect to our enlisted force distribution panels. There's what I would consider a huge difference in what happens with a large unit panel and a small unit panel. So we want to close that gap. A few minor tweaks around the edges that I think we need to make. The end of October, we will conduct a full enlisted evaluation system review. I hate to call it a triennial review, but because I'm not quite sure when was the last time we looked at it this in-depthly. But so we'll take a look and make sure that it meets all the marks. But right now, we like what the system is doing. I think the right folks are getting promoted, and so we'll continue down this path and just continue to make the minor tweaks.
Any closing comments, please?
Let me just say thank you to all of our airmen and all of our partners who are here today. Tanya and I are pretty excited about our first AFA as the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. Looking forward to meeting everybody. We had a great time, and really looking forward to highlighting our 12 Outstanding Airmen of the Year. Thank you to all of our fellow chiefs who are here in the audience. And I really want to thank not only the chiefs, but the commanders for bringing so many airmen with you to this outstanding conference. So thank you. We look forward to spending time with you the rest of this week.
General Goldfein.
Of all the blessings of being your 21st Chief of Staff of the Air Force, the top one by far is I get to do it with my best friend sitting next to me. We've been married now for 34 years. We actually met 40 years ago in our third year of Spanish 1 in high school. And hola, ¿qué tal? But I want to thank our spouses because you really exhibit a very special kind of courage. You know, when you endure the long hours, the hardships, the separations that have become so much a part of a service at war. And you need to know that we never take that for granted. And so to Tanya, to Dawn, to Jay, and to all of our spouses here, on behalf of a grateful nation, thank you for what you do every day.
Madam Secretary, over to you.
Well, why don't we just leave it there? That was pretty good. Thank you.
Excuse me for a second. On behalf of AFA, thank you for all you do for our amazing airmen and their families. Thank you for your insights, and thank you for leading the world's greatest Air Force. Thank you all so much for being here. As our panel departs, would the audience please hold in place for a few minutes as I introduce Denise Hollywood for a short presentation. Thank you very much.